tight rates. Raising interest rates is required. That's historically one time for the currency weakened. We saw that in 2014. I think they had 200 basis points in November 14. Kazakhstan, another oil producer like Nigeria, was just hiked 275 basis points because their currency, which is tracked Nigeria for so long, is now at 450 or so to the dollar. I have said the last few days, we've also been thinking internally that factors volatility. I'm not as aggressive as the other guys, but we're staying fit in this situation. I've got a lot of sympathy for cutting more. This is not the time to worry about inflation. This is the time to try to cut government borrowing costs and minimise the burden on the Nigerian economy.
Thank you so much for your insight there. We'll come back to you certainly, but I'd like to look at Rahman right now and hear his perspective. And I know you're former CFO of a bank and you understand how bankers think, so I want to pose a very specific question to you, because one of the outcomes of the meeting in the Bankers Committee on the weekend with the Central Bank Governor to see how the banking sector can get behind businesses and the broader economy was that the focus will be less on profitability right now. But I just want to know your thoughts on the options open to bankers at this time. Clearly, we know in times of stress, you're looking to cut costs, shaving some of the workers, the numbers in that respect. But how much more can they do really in terms of trying to, if you like, patriotic in this time? Can they, for instance, begin to learn that much less interest rates are taking care of them? Just your perspective.
The most central issue is the default profitability. To the extent that the bank simply can lead to the profitable analysis, and once the bank is illiquid, then the issue of really surviving. So for me, I think looking at the completely agenda until it's over.
So are you concerned about banking liquidity right now? And if so, what is fueling that concern? Is it around the oil price or what exactly?
Well, I think the development and the government and the market and the work that is done is not only the market and the something especially on demand side. And we feel that the primary response to our how we have got the good opportunity for the subsidy question to be over, to look at again. The oil price at $25 per barrel will actually revisit that question of eliminating the subsidy so that the demand side of the asset can be significantly brought down. Because the only thing there is one of the price and one of the people are going to take a very big crash.
Back to my serious guest here. There was a training as well in terms of how corporate Nigeria and just Nigerians in general can get behind the authorities to wait to this problem. We saw what happened last night in the raft of programs and measures announced by the president. It does appear that a lot of people are getting behind the government in trying to resolve these issues. Your thoughts on how we can see that happening in Nigeria?
Different economy out here. The amount of local value added in South Africa is South Africa is a productive economy, not a natural wealth economy. South Africa can deal with contraction to a certain degree without getting to the bones. In the case of Nigeria, the minor contest to import is the average level of inventory that people carry normally is probably about 60 to 90 days, maybe 120 days. Now, from this point when you close the borders, and the borders were closed before, now you intensify that, you close the airports, you are actually coming to folk, you're closing down things, and therefore, just speculative buying and panic buying the inventories of 90 days become inventories of only 20 days. So if everybody starts buying and we are in 20 to 25 days, you start seeing shortages.
Yeah.
So
shortages from everything from food to
everything, medical, and so those strategies have to need a life also. So the stimulus you need is actually bring in products to calm people down so that there's no
because we don't have time to start producing that.
The other thing is that from a global perspective, it hardly happens. I have a global supply and global demand shock at the same time. But this time you have a supply shock in terms of China being the biggest exporter in the world, closing down and doing things. Then you have a demand shock because all social distancing and lockdown. So you are having both at the same time. So you are looking at global regional negative growth. And then Nigeria caught in this whole situation with a very short inventory cycle, compounded by panic buying. So it's quite a delicate situation. So you cannot just copy what other people are doing in terms of stimulus. You need to think it through and see how you can bring in inventory of things so that they can push up. Because shortages could out of control.
So what I hear you saying is that the focus of maybe I'm correct, the focus of these stimulus measures or whatever the government or the central bank chooses to do now is to make sure that we can continue to have the flows from the ports.
Close down the airports, close the borders, so everything can see and things are going to take long. But in the meantime, people are not going to the markets, the hotels are closed, the airlines are closed, so there's a crash in demand, so that affects supply. So it's a different ball game altogether. So the stimulus package has to be measured and targeted, not just as intervention as the way the central would like to say it, but at actually getting supplies in as fast as possible. Testing kits, ventilators, food supply, everything.
Your thoughts on what should be the focus of stimulus? What concerns you the most in terms of the reaction of the fiscal and monetary authorities?
The fiscal to me is very, very important because the monetary stuff is, it's more around liquidity, short term, it's more around, money flows. I think, while we have concerns around shortages, I think the government would think very critically around essential needs, essential goods. They might have exceptions, so flights will have to come in and bring certain things. I think it's also an opportunity, not to waste this crisis, to also start looking internally. So there's this big push around looking internally at raw materials. This might be the time when people start looking at it. Let's improve our capacity to produce things locally. So I think it's going to be a collective effort. The government I think going to be very, very important in this particular initiative. But I'm a little bit more, not as worried, because I think, the government will know what to do. I think the private sector also going to play a big part in this also, because we need to live our lives as normal as we can. So I think we also need to just tell the audience that let's not panic, and have hope and faith that things will work out.
So thank you for the assurance. I'm not sure maybe but I'm calling here from Charles on this point. Larry just mentioned that basically crisis, and I was wondering your thoughts on that. The potential silver lining in all this for the economy, like Nigeria, and a lot of comparison. There's been a lot of paradox with India, and what can we learn from other parts of the world, essentially, in terms of dealing with a crisis like this and underdeveloped economies?
I think one advantage is that the economy is not as complicated as some of those in Asia, for example. So the supply chain disruptions that the analysts have been talking about, I think are going to raise a whole host of problems for a whole host of industries around the world over the next month or two. At the moment, we've been running down inventories, as Mike said. But even the ventilator manufacturers will probably be requiring parts from China that they might have inventories today, but they're going to have issues in a month's time. Take a country like Nigeria, and because there's less dependence on supply chains for most of the economy, because it's larger, more domestically focused, there should be a little, I mean, it's really hard to say, yeah? It has to really, we have to see demand shock and supply shock at the same time, and the supply chain shock is particularly difficult to work out. But I would guess that a country like Nigeria, and again, agricultural sector, a lot of food is produced locally. That shouldn't be interrupted so much, and therefore you do have parts of the economy that are less impacted. Countries that are much more industrialized, much more dependent on complex supply chains from Asia to Europe to the States, we can't even quantify very well the shocks that are going to happen to those factories and to those certain industries yet. So I think Nigeria's dependence on agriculture is actually helpful in this industrializing. But right now, it's kind of good that it's not so industrialized.
Interesting point.
No.
Okay, let's pivot to another very important point, which I'm sure will be a big focus for this MPC, and that's the currency. And we were just speaking before we started the broadcast, and I think it's important for our viewers and investors to really understand the difference in demand and supply dynamics for foreign exchange now compared to 4 years ago and perhaps 8 or 9 years ago during the global financial crisis. So can you just speak to that and potentially what weakness is going on?
Two things are important to note. The deviation from the equilibrium point 8 years ago and the deviation from the equilibrium point 4 years ago, this is lower. So the lower the deviation point, the less the adjustment you have to make to come to equilibrium. Two, in 2008 and 2015, there was a problem with the supply of foreign exchange, but there was no problem with the demand for foreign exchange. Now there's a fall in supply, 50% for the supply, but there's also like a 30% fall in demand. So the gap we're talking about is not that much. So what we need to do, or what has happened essentially is this: there's a convergence around 360, right? Exchange rate, if you take 360 out, you assume that 305 is used for petroleum imports, comes to about 372, right? The difference between 372 and the real effective exchange rate path is not as far as it was when we were at 108 and we had to go to 150. Right. So first of all, there's a convergence, and secondly is the adoption of a crawling peg. This is what has happened. So you have a crawling peg which allows you some movement. Well, we're not going to start speculating about where the rate is going to be and all that. It's the process of exchange rate determination which is changed, because you're now saying oil companies should sell to CBN and not the NNPC. Again, it has serious meanings there. I just want to leave that there.
That's an interesting point, and I think it's something that the authorities really need to analyze. How long is that window where the demand and supply dynamics are still somewhat in our favor? Because when the world gets back to work,
it has been analyzed. Okay.
Right.
So let me say that it has been analyzed. What you are seeing now is playing out of a process which is.
So the adjustment we saw in the IMF window is.
Well, it's much more strategic than you think it is. That's what I can say.
That's what you can tell us there. Okay. Alright, so some valuable insights in that. But your thoughts on the currency, because the point I was trying to make was that there's a narrow window in my mind anyway, while the world gets back to work, that this demand and supply dynamics will be in our favor, because at some point, when the world moves back to that level, the demand will depend.
So you cannot run away from the fact that there's a misalignment between the currency as it's traded and the true value in the market. That misalignment, you have a process to reduce that misalignment, okay, and that process will take you without sending panic signals all over the place. So I think everybody knows how deep the hole is, and everybody knows the past out of it. And it's, let me say that it's, there's a pattern to this, and that it's very well understood and being articulated.
I'll look forward to the details. But I want to go back to Charles now. And Charles, earlier I was reading out what central banks globally have done in terms of stimulating the economy. And your perspective on that, beyond of course adjusting rates, you know, how do you anticipate a central bank such as the Central Bank of Nigeria can really, you know, step forward to make a meaningful impact in moving this economy forward at this time?
Well, I genuinely think that one of the best things they've done in the last few weeks is to allow these exchange rates to converge at that 360 and to see them, and to let the NAFEX move to more like 380. This is really good news. Nigeria's government gets 15-20% more naira for every barrel of oil exported than it did before, and that's exactly what you need when the price of oil has gone down so much. That's exactly what you need. So I think the central bank's move has been smart. I also think that it paves the way for something which is really dying needed, which is for the G7, the G20, the IMF to recognize that this is a global crisis, that you can't have a virus spreading dramatically.
So sorry, Charles, I have to interject because we do have to go to Abuja now because the central bank governor is standing by to read out the reports, rather the decisions of the.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Monetary Policy Committee met on the 23rd and the 24th of March 2020 amidst heightened uncertainty in the global macroeconomic environment arising from major disruptions associated with the outbreak of the coronavirus COVID-19 and the oil price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. The committee assessed the development in the global and domestic environments during the first quarter of 2020 and the outlook for the rest of the year, including the threats to capital flows, growing vulnerabilities across global financial markets, the probability of a global recession, risk to price and financial stability, as well as the quick intervention by central banks to restore normalcy with guidance for further action. 10 members of the committee were in attendance at this meeting. The global economic developments. The committee noted with concern the combined demand and supply shocks to the global economy arising from the outbreak of COVID-19 and the oil price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. It also noted the weakening performance of global output growth since January 2020, reflected in low declining primary commodity prices, disruptions to the global supply chain associated with large-scale global lockdowns of mega metropoles and whole countries, and social distancing. Also, there has been adverse shocks to global capital flows, vulnerabilities and uncertainties in major financial markets, as well as rising corporate debt, public debt in some emerging market and developing economies. Consequently, global output growth in 2020 is projected to fall significantly below the initially projected level of 3.3%. Inflation in the advanced economies continues to trend below long-run targets, except in the United States, especially in the light of prevailing headwinds and heightened uncertainties in the global economy. Central banks in the advanced economies have thus engaged in a coordinated approach with peers to embrace quantitative easing across every sector, notably in transportation, travel and tourism, health, and setting up of social safety net funds to stem the impact of these headwinds on aggregate demand and supply. In the emerging markets and developing economies, price development remained mixed with upward inflationary pressure in some of the key economies. Domestic economic development. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics showed that growth in real gross domestic product (GDP) continued to improve during the fourth quarter of 2019. Consequently, real GDP grew by 2.55% in the fourth quarter of 2019, compared with 2.28% and 2.38% in the preceding and corresponding quarters of 2019 and 2018 respectively. Growth during the fourth quarter of 2019 was driven largely by the strong performance of the oil sector, which grew by 6.36%, though lower than 6.49% recorded in the previous quarter, while the non-oil sector grew by 2.27%. The manufacturing and non-manufacturing purchasing managers indices expanded, though at lower rate in February 2020 for the 35th and 34th consecutive months to 58.3 and 58.6 index points respectively. Star projections indicate that real GDP during the first quarter of 2020 will slow because of the tepid global demand resulting from the recent outbreak of COVID-19, depressed global demand, and the oil price war, which has resulted in supply glut and decline in crude oil prices. This muted outlook for the first half of the year may thus dampen overall growth prospects for 2020. To mitigate this trend, the bank took decisive action to safeguard the Nigerian financial system and the economy from the emerging headwinds. The key policies include provision of extended moratorium on loans by an additional 1 year beginning from March 2020. This is to ease pressure on loan repayments. The bank also reduced interest rates from 9 to 5% on its existing intervention programs over the next year, created a 50 billion naira fund to support households and small and medium enterprises affected by COVID-19, introduced credit support for the healthcare sector, introduced regulatory forbearance to consider temporary and time-limited restructuring of loan terms and tenures to households and businesses affected by COVID-19 and strengthened the loan-to-deposit ratio policy. The bank also announced an intervention fund of about 1.1 trillion naira to cushion the adverse effects of the coronavirus outbreak on the economy. The sum of 1 trillion naira from this amount will be used to support local manufacturing, to boost import substitution, while the balance of 100 billion naira will be used to support the health services and products through the provision of loans to pharmaceutical companies, hospitals and other health practitioners to build new hospitals and health facilities or expand existing ones to first-class health centers. This is in addition to the 1.5 trillion naira private sector-driven Infraco project fund designed to target the construction of critical infrastructure establish drug manufacturing firms in Nigeria and curtail the spread of the coronavirus. In summary, it is expected that through these interventions, about 3.5 trillion naira will be created as stimulus to support the Nigerian economy during this trying time. The committee noted the continued uptick in headline inflation year on year for the 6 consecutive months to 12.2% in February 2020 from 12.13% in the previous month. The increase in inflation was largely attributed to increases in the food and core components, which rose to 14.9 and 9.43% in February 2020 and 9.35% in January 2020, respectively. This was driven by the shocks to food prices associated with renewed insurgency in major food producing areas of the country and persistent infrastructural deficits. The MPC observed that broad money supply contracted for the second consecutive month by 2.29% year-to-date in February 2020, reflecting the decline in net foreign assets and net domestic assets. Specifically, the contraction in M3 was driven primarily by a decline in securities other than shares and currency outside depository corporations in the review period. Aggregate credit, net aggregate credit, however, grew by 1.34% in February 2020. $5 trillion since the inception of the loan to deposit ratio, reflecting the potency of the policy and false urge the management of the bank to sustain the current momentum of improved flow of credit to the private sector in Nigeria. It emphasized the need for coordination with the fiscal authorities to strengthen access to credit to some critical sectors of the economy in global population, particularly those in the informal sector, through the setting up of a special fund, as well as support the enforcement of credit recovery. Accordingly, sectoral distribution of credit between end of May 2019 and February 2020 was as follows: manufacturing sector 533 billion, general retail and consumer loans 380.7 billion, general commerce 2.298 information and communications 163.69 billion, finance and insurance 131.2 billion, construction 112.25 billion, and transportation and storage 45.42 billion, among others. The committee noted the dismal performance in the equities market as the all-share index decreased by 17% capitalization by 10.73% between end of December 2019 and March 2020. The decline was largely attributed to profit-taking and divestment by foreign portfolio investors, the delisting of shares of 3 quoted companies, and capital outflow associated with the COVID-19 and subdued global economic activity. The MPC noted the continued resilience of the banking system, evidenced by the further moderation in the ratio of non-performing loans from 6.59% in January to 6.54% in February 2020. Although the ratio remained above the prudential benchmark of 5%, the committee expressed confidence in the bank's regulatory regime and commitment to maintaining stability in the banking system. The outlook. The overall medium-term outlook for the global economy remains uncertain, with increased acceleration to the current projection for global growth includes disruption to the global supply chain arising from coronavirus pandemic, oil price downturn as a result of subdued global demand, vulnerabilities in major financial markets, rising corporate debt in the advanced economies, and public debt in some emerging market and developing economies, as well as broad uncertainties leading to adverse shocks to foreign investment flows. On the domestic front, available data on key macroeconomic variables indicate the likelihood of subdued output growth for the Nigerian economy in 2020. Based on the current downtrend in oil prices, that the output in 2020 will be less than earlier envisaged. The major downside risks to this outlook, however, include the continued spread of coronavirus, further decline in crude oil prices, and the reduction in accretion to external reserves, reduced government revenue, leading to a weak aggregate demand, declining non-oil receipts, as well as infrastructural and security challenges. These headwinds will, however, be partly mitigated by the timely and effective response of the monetary and fiscal authorities in containing the spread of COVID-19 viral infection, the recalibration and adjustment of the 2020 budget to the revised threshold while pegging expenditure to critical of a new fiscal regime to encourage the build-up of fiscal buffers, sustain CBN interventions in selected sectors, enhanced flow of credit to the real sector, and deliberate policies to diversify the Nigerian economy. Committee's consideration. The committee reviewed the prevailing adverse conditions in the global economy, such as the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic and the oil price shock, as well as of continued oil price supply glut in the near future, focusing on the impact of these headwinds on the Nigerian economy. Committee observed that not only will the COVID-19 pandemic result in a health crisis, it will also result in massive economic crisis that will plunge many countries into recession. The leading industrialized countries. The NPC took into cognizance the impact of the decline in oil prices on accretion to external reserves and the emergence of exchange rate pressures. Committee thus commended and endorsed the management of the bank for its prompt response with the adjustment of the exchange rate to inform market rates and remove distortions. It, however, took note of the likely adjustment of the economy. The committee noted the weakened revenue position of the federal government arising from the sharp drop in oil prices. It reiterated the need for government to urgently reduce reliance on oil revenue by gradually diversifying the economy and improving tax collection. To this end, NPC noted the speedy response of the federal government to the oil price shock by the revision of the 2020 budget downwards by 1.5 trillion naira and the oil price benchmark to $30 per barrel. Budget, as this usually result in the adoption of unrealistic budgetary estimates. In addition, committee noted the introduction of price modulation, resulting in reduction in the pump price of PMS from 145 to 125 naira per liter, and its contributory effect in boosting aggregate demand, lowering inflation, and improving the wealth of the low income in the society. The NPC further noted the persistence of inflationary pressures, a combination of monetary and structural factors, and thus urged the federal government to leverage on the public-private partnership (PPP) to intensify investment in infrastructure to increase output and employment. The committee cited the potentials for foreign direct investment flows to the Nigerian auto manufacturing, aviation, and rail industries, which could take advantage of this viable and untapped domestic and regional markets. The committee noted the sustained improvement in the financial soundness indicators applauding the continued decline in the ratio of non-performing loans, growth in assets of the banking system, and profitability of the industry in the light of increasing global uncertainties. It also recognized the success of the bank's and its potential to alleviate production shortfalls, reduce unemployment, and boost aggregate demand, urging the bank to pursue this and other related policies to a conclusive end. MPC underscored the coronavirus pandemic as a public health crisis, which will continue to undermine any monetary and fiscal stimulus unless appropriate measures are taken to isolate, curtail the spread, and treat infected persons while ensuring that migration across country is prohibited. The MPC therefore called on the federal government steps to safeguard the population through close monitoring and emergency-ready measures to identify and care for infected persons in the country, including compulsory restriction of movement to curtail spread of the pandemic. On the choices before the committee, MPC noted the recent actions of the bank targeted at strengthening the resilience of the financial system and alleviating the initial impact of the crisis. In its wisdom, committee felt that tightening will result in reining in the rising trend in inflation, and that it will support reserve creation. However, it will reduce money supply and limit deposit money banks' credit creation capacity, thus resulting in increasing the cost of credit with adverse impact on output growth. Tightening would also result in a reduction in aggregate demand, as a fall in disposable income will result in output compression, whereas at this time, policy emphasis should be on stimulating aggregate supply and demand, both already weakened by COVID-19. With respect to loosening, whereas the committee felt it would stimulate the economy in the short term and boost aggregate supply and demand, the committee nevertheless was of the view that there was a need to be cautious in loosening, given the fact that it will exacerbate an already worsening inflationary condition, resulting in massive pressure on reserves and the exchange rate. Based on the balance of this argument, the MPC, in taking note of the recent actions already taken by the management of the bank in response to the COVID-19, resolved to allow time for the measures to permeate the economy while allowing the pandemic to wear out its plateau before deciding on further supportive policy measures to boost and strengthen aggregate demand and supply in the recovery phase of the economy. The choice to hold also considered the subsisting loan-to-deposit ratio and the DCRR policies, which sterilize excess liquidity in the banking system. Hence, an increase in the NPR would have been counterproductive. The monetary policy stance arrived at this meeting took cognizance of the need to address the unfolding unfavorable macroeconomic developments, rein in inflation, support growth and employment through the extant interventions and recent initiatives, check capital outflows, and support external reserves and creation, and dampen pressure and ensure foreign exchange market stability. A review of the policy options indicates relative tightness of the current monetary policy stance. The CRR was increased at the last MPC meeting. Time is required for its full effects to be manifest. Increasing the NPR will be contradictory to the recent reduction of interest rates in the CBN intervention programs from 9 to 5%. Besides, an increase in MPR will be taken by deposit money banks as an invitation to increase lending rates, and this will be most undesirable at this point in time when efforts are being made to avert a recession. Besides, a reduction in MPR will not make the DMPs to reduce lending rates, but other strategies of the CBN are making the DMPs to reduce lending rates in furtherance of growth objective. Committee's decision. Committee noted the continued rise in domestic prices, the glut in oil supplies, and low oil prices in the wake of the current global shocks, exchange rate pressure, and other domestic monetary and fiscal responses to the evolving crisis. In view of the foregoing, the committee decided by a unanimous vote to retain monetary policy rate at 13.5% and to hold all other policy parameters constant. In summary, MPC voted 1 to retain the MPR at 13.5%, 2 retain the asymmetric corridor of plus 200 and minus 500 basis points around the MPR, 3 retain the CRR at 27.5%, and 4 retain the liquidity ratio at 30%. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Governor. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we will not be able to have the usual question and answer session on account of our efforts to ensure that we do not spread the coronavirus. You can see the social distancing platform of the MPC room. We want to tell you that we will take up your questions, send them to our Twitter handle, our Instagram page, or Facebook. We will provide answers and clarifications. Also during the week, we will endeavor to be on the various television platforms to provide explanations for the decision, in case you want to know. Thank you so very much, and may God save our country from this pestilence.
Amen.
Amen. And may God save our country from this pestilence.
Amen.
And may God save our country from this pestilence.
Second, I'm going to reaching out the